Welcome to DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIE. Thank you. This is episode number 55. Now, in today's episode, we have a few things to get into. We have a UFC event to talk about. We're going to talk about 3 fights on the main card of the UFC event. Then we're going to talk about the NFL draft. Then we're going to get into my top 5 NBA rankings as of right now in terms of playoff performance. So, without further ado, let's get into it. To start, we are going to talk about UFC Fight Night Garry versus Prates. So this is the UFC Fight Night that is taking place tomorrow night. That is Saturday, April 26th. And I believe it is strongly going to be a great UFC card. A lot of people aren't really talking about it. So for all of you casual MMA, UFC fans, I promise you want to tune into this card. It's going to be exciting. So I'm going to give you some insight on 3 of the fights on this card and what I think the outcome is going to be, so you could be interested in watching it. So to start, the first fight I'm going to talk about is David Onama versus Giga Chikadze. Now, this fight should be really good. Both of these fighters are really good stand-up fighters. They have knockout power. They put combinations together well, and they both like to throw big shots. So I think this is going to be an exciting fight. I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth. And ultimately, for this fight, I am going to pick David Onama to pull off the win against Giga Chikadze. Now, it could definitely go the other way. This is not one of those fights where I feel like it's a landslide situation where it's obviously going to be Onama. Onama has, in one of his earlier fights, shown that if the fight goes very long, he can get a little bit winded. He had a fight against Landwehr where he ended up losing a decision fight because at the end of the fight, he just didn't seem to have the gas. Actually, both of them were a little bit out of gas, but nonetheless, if it goes late, I think that will favor Chikadze a little bit more. Chikadze is not one of those fighters that seems to tire very much, but I just feel like Onama's going to be able to put together a few more combinations and get the win. Now, the next fight that I'm going to talk about is Randy Brown against Nicholas Dalby. Now, Randy Brown is one of those fighters who's very long. He has great reach, very explosive, and Nicholas Dalby is a fighter who has a lot of power and can definitely get the win in this fight. But for this particular fight, I am going with Randy Brown for the win. I think that Randy Brown is going to be able to maintain distance and then probably hit him with a 1-2 jab cross. And I actually think that Randy Brown is going to win this fight by knockout. Now, if I had to predict which round, I'm leaning second round, but I wouldn't be surprised if he knocks him out in the first. So, for Randy Brown versus Nicholas Dalby, I am going Randy Brown by knockout in the second round. Now, the last fight that I'm going to talk about on this UFC card is the main event. It is the one that this whole card essentially was built around. It is 2 up-and-coming stars in the UFC, both who have had great wins, have beaten a lot of people to have a lot of fanfare from 2 different parts of the country. You got Garry, who is from Ireland. He's basically the best fighter from Ireland. And yes, that is including Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is well past his prime. Conor McGregor hasn't actually won a fight in so long, it's hard to even remember when that was. So yes, Machado Garry is the best fighter, MMA fighter today out of Ireland, and he's essentially carrying the flag on his back. He's a lengthy fighter. He's got strength. He also is a very well-rounded fighter, which is why he is favored in this fight. Essentially, the card is built around him making his audience a little bit bigger and moving up in the rankings. Now, his opponent, Prates, is a Brazilian fighter who has just been smoking the scene as soon as he came into the UFC. He's got several knockouts, he's got vicious power, and a demeanor that you just love to see in the UFC of somebody who just doesn't stop. And even when he's not, throwing punches, you just see his demeanor is like, I'm looking to end you. Now, in this particular fight, Machado Garry is favored. I think part of him being favored is he definitely is more popular amongst, non like deep UFC fans. Now, even though Machado Garry is favored for this fight, I'm actually going with the upset in the main event. I do think that Prates is going to be able to pull off the win, and I wouldn't be surprised if Prates pulls off the win by knockout. Prates is also one of the members of the Fighting Nerds, which I've mentioned them in some previous episodes where I'm reviewing UFC fights. Fighting Nerds is probably the number one gym right now out of Brazil, and yes, that includes Box. The Fighting Nerds, all of the people who rep the Fighting Nerds, I believe they're still undefeated in the UFC right now. They've been basically just climbing the charts month after month after month, and I think it'll be no different for Prates. Now, Prates didn't start in the Fighting Nerds gym, but he does train there often enough. And like I always say, especially in a combat sport, iron sharpens iron. And if you get to train with some of the best fighters day in and day out, it definitely is going to benefit you. I think everybody's going to be behind him. And I think that Prates pulls off the upset and gets the win in the main event. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the NFL draft. So, as of right now, we have finished the first round, the second round, and the third round. The first round was yesterday, the second and third round were tonight. Now, to be honest, when I originally wrote this segment for me to bring up talking to it, it was actually before tonight's second and third round. And the last part of what I'm going to talk about in this segment is the same theme that I thought I was going to talk about, but much more expanded. So we'll get into that in a second. So the first couple of highlights that I wanted to talk about is some of the picks from the very first round. So, of course, the very first pick overall, which essentially gets the most notoriety in any NFL draft, was Cam Ward. So Cam Ward was drafted number 1 to the Tennessee Titans. To me, I feel like that pick was kind of a no-brainer. I think at this point, everybody had kind of collectively agreed that Cam Ward is considered the best quarterback in this draft. I think a lot of that has to do with perceived ceiling. He has a lot of attributes that people feel like, okay, if he can put it all together, then he has a good chance of having a successful career. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if that's going to happen in Tennessee. I think Will Levis is kind of the same type of prospect where he has a lot of physical talents, but hasn't been able to put it together to turn into winning football. Now, I'm not saying that Cam Ward and Will Levis are on the same caliber, but they have a similar style in the sense that a lot of the people's belief in their ceiling is about their physical attributes, not so much, what they've done on the field. And don't get me wrong, Cam Ward had a really good season. I just feel like, I wouldn't be surprised if Cam Ward struggles in his first year or two. So, I mean, if I was Tennessee, especially considering they have so many more holes to fill, I feel like they should definitely start someone else. And then if Cam Ward progresses through the season, maybe towards the end of the season, you get him like 3 or 4 games under his belt so that by next season he really feels like, okay, he's ready to go. Also, because you need so many more pieces, you really don't want to have, unless you think you're actually going to make the playoffs, which I think they have no chance of doing, then you would rather have, a higher draft pick for next year so that you can continue to build around Cam Ward. So we'll see how it goes. I do understand why he was the first pick overall, but I just don't have any confidence in Tennessee as an organization right now to think that it's actually going to develop into something like the last 2 years where we had top quarterbacks immediately make an impact and get their team to the playoffs. Now, the next biggest thing from the day one of the draft was the Jacksonville Jaguars trading up to the number 2 spot in order to get Travis Hunter. I think this was a great decision. Do I think that he's going to immediately make Jacksonville some sort of contender? No. But but Jacksonville in itself does have a lot of talent. And out of every division in the AFC, I think you could say easily that they have the weakest division. So it technically wouldn't really take much for Jacksonville to get a little bump and be a playoff contender. So could this happen? Yeah. Does it really rely on Travis Hunter for that to happen? Probably not. I think it's really going to more so depend on if Trevor Lawrence is going to become the Trevor Lawrence that everybody in Jacksonville is hoping he can, if he can stay healthy, and what happens with this new coaching staff. But I do feel like getting somebody like Travis Hunter, who is from Florida, so for him it'll be great because he's essentially going back home. Obviously not from Jacksonville, but still being in the state that he grew up in, I think will be great for him to get his NFL start. I do think that they're because they definitely have holes on both sides of the ball. He'll get a great opportunity to play both sides. I think they should start him at corner and probably mix him in at receiver, but we'll see what they decide. But I definitely think it was a good trade, and I think it was worth it for what they gave up to move up a few spots to get him at number 2. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of the NFL draft, as I mentioned earlier, was originally written yesterday. And it was that Shedeur Sanders went undrafted. Now, when I originally wrote that, it was just about the first round. And there had been talk earlier in the week that, maybe he would slide, and he could potentially slide all the way out of the first round. People were saying, well, if that happens, then he'll get drafted early in the second round. Well, today, we have the second round and the third round, and he still didn't get drafted. I think it's absurd. And on top of that, okay, let me rewind. If Shedeur had not been picked already, but there were no other quarterbacks picked in the second and third round, I'd be like, okay, no big deal. However, I believe we're now at 4 or 5 quarterbacks that have been drafted already. Like, Milroe got drafted. So, obviously, Cam Ward got drafted number 1, right? And Jackson Dart got drafted late in the first round as the Giants traded back up into the first round to get him. Now, there was some speculation that some people liked Jackson Dart more than Shedeur because they were like, oh, his physical attributes, right? I think it's crazy, but at least I can live with it, right? But Jalen Milroe was drafted by the Seahawks in the third round. Jalen Milroe is, how I mentioned earlier about comparing Cam Ward to Will Levis? Well, Jalen Milroe is more like Will Levis, where he's got all these attributes. He's a good runner. He shows, ability to throw the ball, but nothing in, I don't know, anybody's evaluation to me would make sense to pick Jalen Milroe over Shedeur Sanders? Then, later in the third round, Dillon Gabriel gets drafted. Now, is Dillon Gabriel more athletic? Sure. But teams aren't running option in the NFL. So what are we doing here? But the worst of it to me, is the Saints in the second round picked up Tyler Show or Shoe. I mean, I watch a lot of football. I do a lot of analysis around football. I listen to other people do analysis on football. I haven't heard this guy's name at all. And for him to be the third quarterback off the board, for him to be the quarterback essentially three quarterbacks ahead of where Shador could be taken, that is crazy. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's clear that the owners have somehow colluded to blackball Shador from the league to some degree. Now, as much as I thought it was unbelievable for him to not get picked in the first 3 rounds, I find it unimaginable for him to go the entire draft without getting drafted. But if by some chance that were to happen, then we'd have concrete evidence that he clearly was being blackballed from the league for some odd reason. And it has nothing to do with his actual play on the field. I mean, technically, I feel like he should have easily already been drafted, especially in the 3rd round, especially by some of the teams that drafted him, like the Saints. Shocking would be an understatement. So, Shador Sanders is still sitting at the top of everyone's board by the start of tomorrow for the 4th round. We'll see what happens, but yeah, this is crazy. And honestly, it's not so much of a negative on Shador. I think it's more of a negative on the NFL. Like, what are we doing here? So, we'll see what happens tomorrow. We'll see what round he eventually gets drafted, and then I'll probably try to follow up with it in the next episode. Okay, so lastly, we're going to finish this episode with my top 5 NBA rankings playoff edition as of right now. So with this top 5, these are the top 5 teams that I feel like have been playing the best so far through the first round of the playoffs. All right, so without further ado, of course, at number 1, we have to go with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Yes, they're a 1 seed playing an 8 seed. But to be honest, the 8 seed they're playing is far better than the 8 seed on the other side of the conference, in the Eastern Conference. Honestly, I think Memphis, if they played in the East, would probably be like a 6 seed. And they would only be a 6 seed if they played the same schedule they already played, but, they just got to get sent over there when the playoffs started. If they actually played the same games as the East side, it probably would have ended up as like a 4 seed. Remember, earlier in the season, they were in number 2 slot in the West. So, yes, they hit a skid. They ended up falling to 8, but that's because the West was just so competitive. So, this is not like your regular 8 seed team. But OKC has made them look like an 8 seed team. The 2 games they played in OKC beat the brakes off of them, and it wasn't even close. And then the game 3 in Memphis was up by 29, and OKC just reeled them in. Yes, John Morant ended up getting hurt. I did see a report earlier today saying that he's going to miss game 4, which to me signals that this series is going to be a sweep. But nonetheless, I think OKC is showing their dominance. They're showing why they're one of the best defenses in the league. They're showing why they have so much depth, why Sam Presti should win Executive of the Year, and they clearly look like the best team right now in the playoffs. Now coming in at number 2, I have to go with the Cleveland Cavaliers. As of right now, the Cavaliers are up 2-0 in their series. And the last game, game 2, they also broke a record by hitting 11 threes in the second quarter alone. And that really helped them stretch out their lead. And I believe, if I recall correctly, before the playoffs started, I had Cleveland winning in 5 games. And I'm still holding on to that, but I would not be surprised if they ended up with a sweep. So we'll see how it finishes out. Obviously, when playing Miami does have, heat culture. So I just find it hard to believe for them to just lay down and just kind of not win any games. But Cleveland is the number 1 seed for a reason. They've been playing well all season. So I wouldn't be surprised if it does end up being a sweep. But I'm hoping for Miami's sake they at least get 1 game out of it. Now coming in at number 3, I'm going with the Boston Celtics. Now the Boston Celtics are currently up 2-1. They did lose tonight to Orlando. So originally I was gonna have them at 2, but after their loss today, I had to knock them down to 3. They were pretty dominant against Orlando in Boston, but tonight was not so much. But the thing that still has me atop of the teams that have given up a loss so far in their series is because the 2 games that they won them convincingly. And the game tonight that they lost, they had like their worst quarter of the year in the third quarter where they only scored 11 points. And then throughout the game, they had so many turnovers, way more turnovers than they've had in not only just a series, but in a very long time. So they had a bunch of turnovers and they missed a bunch of shots and scored one of their smallest outputs of the season in the third quarter, yet they still barely lost in Orlando. So that to me shows that it pretty much takes Boston to have their worst game for Orlando to win, and I just don't see that happening going forward. So I do think that Boston will probably win the next 2 games in this series in 5. So as of right now, I got Boston in the number 3 spot. Now at the number 4 spot, I had to go with the Los Angeles Clippers. Now the Clippers have surprised some people. They are the 5th seed in this 4-5 matchup, so technically they are the underdogs. The first 2 games were on the road in Denver, and really, the Clippers could be up 3-0. The first game that they lost, it went into overtime. It was a close game in overtime. Russell Westbrook had a huge impact in helping Denver get to the win over the Clippers. But since then, Kawhi has looked like, this cyber Megatron, whatever you want to call him, person that people know that he can be when he's healthy. And he's just been destroying Denver. Destroyed them in the second game. The game was still close. Destroyed them in the third game, and the game wasn't close. So the Clippers have really looked impressive. Everybody around Kawhi has really stepped up, and this could be one of those series where if things keep going the way they are, they could get Denver out here a lot quicker than most people would have expected. And the Clippers, who kind of got knocked for their numbers throughout the season, seem to have a legit home field advantage. Everybody seemed to step it up a little bit when they were back at home in the Intuit Dome. So we'll see if that continues into Game 4. And then lastly, rounding out my top 5, I had to go with the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves are the 6th seed in the West, but they are currently up 2-1 against the Lakers. They did pull off Game 3 win tonight. Anthony Edwards took over late. Now, yes, there is a slight caveat that Luka Doncic was under the weather. They said he had a stomach bug and so on and so forth. But he still was pretty much productive late. So I don't know if him not being sick would have changed this particular game. But I just think that Minnesota is really playing well as a team. They really have kind of built their confidence and realized, like, hey, even though the Lakers have the big stars, we do have a superstar on our team who's willing to compete against anybody. And he's shown that. And now I think Minnesota is really starting to click on all cylinders and realizing just how good they could be. This Game 4 is going to be really tricky because I think if the Lakers lose Game 4, the likelihood of them coming back from being down 3-1 is very slim. So as of right now, I got to give the 5th spot to the Minnesota Timberwolves. So that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.